Good morning, Mavens, near and far. Today is Thursday, June 20th, and we were just saying, start of summer today, summer solstice. It's very hot here in New York where I'm recording. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I hope you are somewhat cooler. No better way to cool off than with a nice, refreshing, tall glass of Talmud study.
By the way, Jonathan, it is in the 80s in Florida, in Miami Beach. It's
Yes,
cooler.
you know it's bad when it's cooler in Miami.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I received a lovely email from a nice fellow in the UK who affiliates with Finchley Reformed Synagogue, which is kind of like the WRT of England. LOL. But he commented to me that he had found this class online on YouTube and is watching and learning Talmud. So that makes me so happy.
Good, good.
We're international as well. My folks, speaking of international, are on vacation this week, so I'll force feed them this by recording afterward. In the meantime, I'm going to prepare us for blessing by muting the congregation so that we can say together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So today's deep dive into the Babylonian Talmud will be a kind of long-form study of a passage that I think it's just lovely. It's just a lovely passage. I kind of framed the study for this week and next as bonus sessions for our springtime study. So they're not on any particular topic. It's just sort of let me introduce you to a couple of passages from the Talmud that I love. I have selected dates and subject matter for next year, that is the next Jewish year, actually starting 4 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. Cantor Kleiman and I will once again team up to do 4 sessions in Elul. So the holidays are quote unquote late this coming year, meaning that Rosh Hashanah, Erev Rosh Hashanah is not until October 2nd. So the first 4 Thursdays in September, I think the 5th, 12th, 19th, and 26th, we'll have Talmud with Cantor Kleiman and me getting ready for the holidays. Then we'll take a nice hiatus to experience the days of awe and Sukkot and Simchat Torah. And then we'll resume for the rest of the fall until mid-late December. And the topic for our fall semester of study, which I think is 7 sessions, is going to be a walk through the stages of Jewish life from birth to death. So we'll look at Talmudic passages that pertain to childbirth and Brit Milah, bris, Jewish status issues. We'll talk about how the Talmud understands the concept of bar mitzvah. And we'll get into marriage and divorce and conversion and funerals. So it should be very interesting. You'll look at where a lot of the customs that we still observe today in marking the cycles of life through Jewish tradition actually are first recorded, that is to say, in the Talmud. So Steve Kessler's in the waiting room. Here we go. Today, our bonus session number 1 will take us into the end of Tractate Chagigah, 3a, and into 3b. So we're going to look at Tractate Chagigah, 3a and b. Chagigah is about the festival offerings. On its face, there's nothing necessarily, outrageously distinctive or noteworthy about Tractate Chagigah. And as usual, the writing is so discursive that you kind of have to go through at length and then cherry pick favorite passages, which is exactly what I've done today. So I'm going to bring up on screen 3a, the end of Tractate Chagigah, Daf 3a, which records a really interesting Maisa or Maaseh, and it's something that happened to the rabbis. So we begin at the top of the page. Everybody have it on screen? It's been a few weeks, so I always like to make sure I'm not too rusty. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught. And of course, the word Tanu is a giveaway that we are going back to the Mishnaic period. So this is a Baraita or an extra Mishnaic teaching. Tanu Rabbanan Ma'aseh. So there's that word. I gave it its familiar Yiddish pronunciation, Maisa, like a Bubba Maisa. You've probably heard of that before. A Maisa is Yiddish pronunciation of Ma'aseh, which comes from the Hebrew word ose or asa, ose shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom. It's just the Hebrew verb for to do or to make, like the French faire, right? So to do or to make in Hebrew is ayin, sin, he, asa, ose, ma'aseh is something that is done, or an episode, or a thing that happened. So ma'aseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma. Okay, so here's a ma'aseh. Here's an actual anecdote about Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka and Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma. Shehalchu lehakbil penei Rabbi Yehoshua. So they were walking along. Halchu, they were walking. They were going along. Lehakbil, from Kabbalah, like lechadodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nikabala. Let us greet the Sabbath. So likabel or lahakbil in this interesting causative formation of the verb is simply to greet. They were walking along to greet Pnei Rabbi Yehoshua bifki'in. So they went out to greet Rabbi Yehoshua in a place called Piki'in. Amar lahem, he said to them, meaning Rabbi Yehoshua, seeing the people who had come to greet him, said to them, Ma chidush haya b'veit hamidrash hayom. What chidush, and we're going to come back to this word. This is the word we're talking about. What chidush, what chidush haya was there, b'veit hamidrash hayom, in the Beit HaMidrash today, in the study hall today. So what did you learn today that is new? And this is a very important concept that I don't think we've really unpacked prior to right now. So a chidush, or again, giving it its Yiddish pronunciation, you meet kind of like a rabbi, perhaps more inclined to wear black and tzitzis than I am. He would probably call it a chiddush. A chiddush. What chiddush did you discover in the study hall today? A chidush means a novel interpretation. So it comes from the Hebrew word chadash. The root is chet, dalet, shin, chadash. Very, very common word. I'm trying to think of words that you know that include this phrase. Here's one. Chadashot are news or announcements, right? So if you're a Jewish camper, you go to Jewish camp, it's one of those words that's kind of in Hebrewish. Your bunk counselor or your division head might say, okay, we're going to start the day with chadashot. I'm going to start the day with news, with announcements. Like today, bunk 5 is on cleanup and whatnot. So chadashot, it's a word I remember learning for the first time as a Jewish kid in religious school or camp. Also, interestingly enough, the word is directly linked to a word that many of the women of Reform Judaism who study faithfully with Cantors, Kleinman, and Rudnitsky are familiar with, which is Chodesh, like Rosh Chodesh. Now, we know that Rosh Chodesh means the new month. A Chodesh is a month or a moon, but it comes from the same word that means to renew, because the moon is the thing that goes through cycles and constantly renews itself, approximately 12 times a year. So that's our Rosh Chodesh, meaning moon, but also from the same root that means new. Okay, very important word. Just want us to hold on to it because it really is the stuff of this opening paragraph. What new thing did you learn in the Beit HaMidrash today? That's Joshua's question for these other rabbis. Amrulo, they said back to him, Talmidecha anu, umemecha anu shotin. We are your students, they say. Talmidecha anu, we are your students. Umemecha anu shotin. I love this phrase. And we drink from your waters. Right? We are your. So that's it. What new thing did you learn in the Beit Midrash today? Oh no, revered Rabbi Joshua, we are your pupils and we drink from your waters. Amar lahem, Joshua said back to them, Afal pichen, great phrase, even though, despite this, Afal pichen means despite that, nevertheless, I efshar levet midrash belo chidush. And the literal translation is, I efshar, it is impossible levet midrash to go to the Beit HaMidrash or to participate in the life of Jewish study below chidush, without learning something new. They translate it down here. I don't love the word they used for the chidush, which is a novelty, because novelty has certain connotations that imply, I think, lack of substance, right? It's just a novelty or something that's kind of faddish or like the latest trend. That is not at all what is meant by a chidush here. So you really have to kind of just scrape out from your brain the residue of the way they translated the word chidush here, which is a novelty. That is not what is meant at all. In the literal sense, what is meant is, did you learn something new? Did you have an insight into Torah that had never been discovered before? That's the important thing that Joshua was saying about Torah study. So now, again, let's just review this really interesting passage. Two distinguished sages, Yochanan ben Baroka and Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma. And of course, as we know from Sefaria, all you need to do is hover your cursor over the name of a sage, click on it, slide over to the right, and you can learn a small capsule bio. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka was a student of Rabbi Yehoshua. Okay, thank you. We know that from the text, but it's nice to have it corroborated here. You can see he is of the fourth generation of the Tanaim. We know that it's Tanaitic because the word at the beginning of the paragraph over here is Tanu. So these are the early sages, lived in the early part of the 2nd century of the Common Era. He does not appear frequently in the Talmud, but many of his statements present a minority view about women. That is an interesting little factoid about Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. For example, he taught that the commandment of procreation applies to women as well as to men. Okay, thank you. And then his colleague, Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma, we'll click on him. Older, you can see, but overlapping. He was a student of Rabbi Akiva, known for his brilliance as well as for his extreme poverty. When Rabban Gamliel of Yavne found out about his suffering, he promoted him. So he floated him a bit of a lifeline. So these two distinguished sages go to greet their teacher, and he says, okay, what new thing did you learn in the study hall today? And almost out of fear of insulting the great master, their teacher, they say, oh no, like we wouldn't deign to, share anything that we could have learned from anyone other than our master. Like we drink the water of your Torah. And Yehoshua says, I appreciate the respect. Thank you for the kavod. But it ain't Jewish study without a chiddush. You are not actually participating in the life of the Beit Midrash unless you've discovered something new, or unless a new interpretation that has never been heard before has been brought forth. And I'll just say one last coda to this passage that I just really love. For me, as I'm a frequent reader of other rabbis' sermons, so particularly around the high holidays, I get a little bit in over my skis because I tend to be in demand as a sermon editor for a few colleagues. I've whittled my list down, and basically anyone who comes to me to read their sermon, they know that I'm fairly liberal with my red pen, which I guess is what they're masochistic in the way they want me to tear their words apart. But among the highest compliments that I find myself inspired to pay when I'm reading my colleagues' sermonic work is, oh, that's a great chiddush. Like that's an insight into Torah that I've never seen before. And then I'll say, where did you get that? And they'll say, no, 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 it's a true Chiddush. I came up with it. It occurred to me. Or I was reading this very obscure passage, and I'm like, well, that's going to be a Chiddush for everyone in the room because nobody's ever heard of that before. I will say, I had the opportunity to pay this compliment yesterday. A young woman named Danielle Rader, Danny Rader, who was my student at WRT, is leaving on Sunday for Jerusalem. She's making Aliyah for the year to study at Hebrew Union College in Israel in the rabbinical program. So I'm very excited. This is sort of like I get to kfel that another one of my students is going off to become a rabbi. She's giving the Devar Torah on Friday night at WRT. So whether you're able to be with us in the sanctuary or want to tune in at 6:15 online, it's a great Devar Torah. And there was more than one place where I said, oh, that's a great Chiddush. There were a couple of things I didn't even know, but I'm not going to spoil them. But spoiler alert, it's a great drasha. It's a great Devar Torah. And this is a kid. She's 28, and she's going to run circles around her classmates, at least in certain aspects of the work. She went to Harvard Divinity School. She's very learned already. So she's entering the rabbinate, as a very, first year out of 5 student. Academically, she's very advanced. So that's kind of exciting for me. Anyway, come on Friday night if you want to hear a Chiddush. Okay, so now to you. We've taken a few minutes. We've taken about 15 minutes to unpack and for me to kind of comment a leisurely way on this passage. What do you notice? What does it say to you? Does it surprise you in any way? Russell.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for bringing this to our attention because I also think this is absolutely beautiful. In fact, what's disappointing to me is that the other rabbis don't get it. In the first place, it seems to assume that teaching is a passive exercise. There's a fountain and you drink from it and it's done. But if there's to be something, the greatest teachers, and I would include you among them, plant seeds in the minds of their students, and every student is having a different experience. They're all learning something new. And so I love the fact that the great rabbi, is reminding them that it's they who need to teach themselves based on the learning from him.
Beautiful. Thank you for that expansion of our insight. That's a good Chiddush too. And I would add, by the way, let's not forget who Rabbi Joshua is. We've actually encountered Joshua before on a number of occasions, probably most memorably in our very first session when we made the leap from studying Mishnah to studying Gemara a couple of years ago. Many of you were with us then, and if you're following sequentially in the recordings on YouTube, you'll go back to our first Talmud class. The passage where I believe it's a different Elazar, but Rabbi Elazar is trying to produce miracles to prove his halachic point. It's Rabbi Joshua who stands up in the middle of the Beit Midrash and says, Lo b'shamayim hi. Jurisdiction over matters of Jewish law and practice is not in the heavens, right? So even if you summon a bat kol, a divine voice to, proclaim the definitive legislation, that is not authoritative in his read of the Jewish tradition. So to me, I'm not suggesting that these are analogous. I'm suggesting that they're kind of parallel. Like if you want to get a window into Joshua as a pedagogue, for him, human innovation is clearly a cherished part of the Jewish tradition. So I like to think of Rabbi Joshua as one of the OG Reformed rabbis. And I'm using that term anachronistically, deliberately. Right. Okay.
If I may just add
Please.
to that, it also reminds us that the Torah is given to all of us. It's not given just to Moses. It's not given to the great rabbi. It's given to you. It's what you make of it. And so okay,
I try to demonstrate that though in a much more just like basic mechanical way every Shabbat when I'm rehearsing with the upcoming weekend's bar and bat mitzvah family. I ask them, okay, I said, so what time are you getting here? Services are at 10 a.m. and they're usually getting there around 8:45 to take pictures beforehand. I said, you are fully authorized to take a Torah out of the ark, to hold it, to unroll it, to pose with it. I said, it's your Torah. You don't need a rabbi to, place a Torah in your hands. I said, the Torah belongs to the Jewish people. So, okay, they're a little bit surprised that I say that. Okay, Steve Kessler, you're next.
Well, echoing what Russell just said in your phrase, human innovation, I think those passages illustrate the concept of learning. It's not just teaching, meaning that we're blessed by being created by God, that we have the capacity to be learning, and that Torah should be viewed as a constant dynamic source of learning and wisdom that and we don't just learn in a vacuum. You should it's essential that you're learning with others, and by interacting, there's constantly new potential of learning together.
Lovely. Yeah, it's I think not insignificant to observe, as you just did, that it's not one sage who's ambling by himself from the study hall. It's a pair, and presumably a chavruta, like a pair of students who are deliberately studying and learning Torah together. Lovely. Michelle.
So one of the things that I've always loved that is about Jewish study and the history is, and you see it here, and then post Talmud, we continue to see it, and it's a conversation among the ages, across the ages. And I think importantly, they cite their sources. So even when you're trying to talk about new ideas, maybe it's that I wrote for government public consumption for so many years, you cite your sources, right?
Right.
Feed into me and you cite your sources. You can come up with your own interpretation, but this opens, as they all do, with this is who it was, this is who we're talking to. And post Talmud, you have the conversations across the ages as well. And so it is continuing, but it doesn't emerge from nothing.
That's right. And in fact, we're going to see literally momentarily exactly that trend exemplified by Rabbi Joshua's next question to these students. So hold that thought, because his next question, I think, is illustrative of your point. Judy.
It reminds me of the Pesach, the Passover story, where the boy comes home to his mother, could be a girl, of course, too. And she says, so David, what did you learn? What question did you ask today? So that during any class, it's incumbent upon the student to be thinking of asking something in order to learn even more.
Right, because nothing new, no chiddush will, spontaneously emerge from study unless the questions are being asked. Right? If the lecturer is just reciting lecture notes into a study hall of eager sponges who believe that their only role is that they're there to listen, it will simply function on autopilot and quickly become stale. Like
the student
right.
is not passive. The student has to be active in some way, participating in.
Exactly. And the reason that I feel like, I for one, as an educator, as a person who cares a lot about, Jewish education, the only, I shouldn't say the only, but by far the most important reason that my teaching has improved over the years is because of the chidushim that have been brought from the students because of the questions they're asking, which force me as the lecturer, at least in a lecture-based format, or as a teacher in any class, to think more deeply and to apply more intellectual rigor so that the claims that I make in my efforts to educate can be refined. And sometimes, by the way, overruled or overturned. Like I've really had some moments where somebody has asked a question or said something where I've said, I've got to go back and just rethink this whole premise. I think I've been getting this one wrong. Okay, let's see what Rabbi Joshua does with this, because he's not done with this conversation and neither are his students. So Again, love that. The Hebrew also here this is a nice passage because it's really not very difficult Hebrew. Lots of words that even a casual Hebrew reader is going to recognize. Okay, Shabbat shel mi haita. So Shabbat, that's a word we all know. Shel mi is who, W-H-O, haita, was it. So literally, the Sabbath of whom was it? Remember, in classical Hebrew, even in modern Hebrew, you can invert syntax liberally and still produce the same meaning, and that is done all the time. So whose Shabbos was it this week? And as you can see from Steinsaltz, Joshua asked him, whose week was it? Meaning, who was the lecturer this week? Which also is fascinating because it tells you that these disciples are going to a Beit Midrash where it is not the same teacher every week. That to me is a significant insight into the norms of the ancient academy. But we'll go on. Shabbat shel Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Haita. Now this is a very prominent figure. It was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's week. And who's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Again, and so he would have been an older Tana. Among the scholars in Yavna at the time of Rabban Gamliel, who was actually a second-generation sage, when the Sanhedrin, the Jewish judicial body, post-temple destruction, temporarily deposed Rabban Gamliel, they installed Rabbi Elazar as his replacement. Beyond his scholarship, he was also known for his great wealth and generosity. So especially considering that at least one of the two disciples here is very, very poor. That's an interesting study in contrast. Okay, so Elazar ben Azariah was lecturing. Goes on in the Hebrew, Uva mehaita Haggadah hayom. And what was the Haggadah today? And again, they don't mean the Haggadah shel Pesach. Haggadah, that's the word I've highlighted here, is simply a word that means telling. So what was he talking about? Like, what was the subject? Amrulo, they replied to Rabbi Joshua, Bifarashat Hakhel. So he was talking about the section of the Torah known as Hakhel, or the mitzvah of assembly. Hakhel is from the verb, or from the root kahal, kuf he lamed, a kahal, or sometimes elongated to the word kihila, maybe yet another Jewish word you've heard. I use it a lot, just in my own Hebrewish. A kihila is a congregation. So we're talking in the section about the Israelite assembly, the mitzvah assembly. Okay, and Joshua, of course, he's very curious. Uma darashba, and what did he drash on? Like, what was his drush? All right, let's find out. Now we are into, and again, you don't have the plain text, you only have the bold text in the Hebrew. The bold text represents the words on the page. The unbolded text is Steinsaltz's interpolation, the gloss that really helps, like, for the text to sound more like a normal thing you might read in English. Okay. Hakhel et ha'am ha'anashim v'anashim v'hataf. All right, so the passage that he was drushing is Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 12. You can see it in the English here. Assemble the people, the men, the women, and the children. If this has kind of a familiar ring to it, that's sort of like the herald cry of anyone who grew up conservative or Orthodox, who davened a lot in shul on Shabbos particularly, is familiar with this passage because this is one of the early announcements in the liturgy for the Torah service. Right, so you're about to take the Torah out of the ark, and one of the declarations, like some of them have been preserved in the Reform prayer book, like we take a Torah out of the ark and we do Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, right? For from Zion came forth Torah. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai mirushalayim, and the word of God from Jerusalem. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah, right? These are all words and phrases that come from Scripture. In an Orthodox shul, there's often an opening preamble passage to all of this stuff at the very beginning of the Torah that says, Hakhel et ha'am, ha'anashim v'anashim v'hataf, etc. Assemble the people, the men, women, and children, and the little ones in your midst to hear the word of God. Like, that's the declaration to say, Jewish people, we're about to take the Torah out and read it as we do every week. listen up, gather round, right? That's the scriptural phrase. So that's what these two disciples report to Rabbi Joshua is the subject of the drush this week. Going back to the text, let's click on the verse just to see it in its original Torah context. All you have to do is click right here. It comes up in your right-hand sidebar, and you can see. So Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 12, we're near the very end of the Torah. We're just 3 chapters from the end. So this is part of Moses's swan song, his final sermonic address to the Israelites before he takes his leave of leadership and life and hands over the reins to Joshua. And the passage goes like this. So specifically, it comes in the context of a larger set of, stipulations around festival observances. And it actually goes on, and this is important. It says, on the festival of Sukkot, which I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, was the great festival of the year. So much so that the rabbis referred to Sukkot as Hechag. It literally means the holiday. So the holiday in Jewish life par excellence. Deuteronomy envisions Sukkot as a pilgrimage festival, one of 3 regulated times of year when people would have to travel from their distant places with their flocks or with money to purchase sacrificial offerings in the marketplaces that surrounded the ancient temple compound. They would make pilgrimage on foot to Jerusalem. That is why these 3 holidays are called regalim, which literally means holidays on foot or pilgrimage festivals. We know them as Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. We just finished Shavuot a week ago. It was a week ago Wednesday. So this, of course, is the pilgrimage festival par excellence, the festival par excellence, Sukkot. And you may not know this about Sukkot, but according to the book of Deuteronomy, when all Israel comes to appear before your God Adonai in the place that God will choose, which is just Deuteronomy's euphemistic way of referring to Jerusalem, sidebar, the book of Deuteronomy is framed as Moses's final sermons to the Israelite community. Moses, of course, has not entered the promised land himself. He will not enter the promised land himself. Joshua will do that with the troops. They will take the land by force, dispossessing the Canaanites, who are slated to be either depopulated or conquered or all sorts of nasty things. What happens in biblical war is pretty much a nightmare come to life. But this is envisioning a future where the Jewish people have conquered the land, settled in their communities, and have made Jerusalem their central shrine. But of course, Moses, even though he's a pretty prescient dude and he is given the power of prophecy, the Bible just restrains its impulse to make him too much of a prognosticator and does not have Moses know the name of the place which God will choose to make the central shrine for the Israelite community. But of course, anyone reading the text, which actually came from the 7th century BCE, when the Israelites had centuries previous already settled in the land. You doing the jujitsu here? Anyone reading this text, anyone hearing Deuteronomy in the time it was composed, or shortly thereafter, would recognize, oh, of course, we're talking about Jerusalem. And what do they do on Sukkot? It's not just about decorating a sukkah and waving branches around. You shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel. So this is one of the times when the Israelites are commanded to tikra, in the Hebrew, tikra et Torah zot, neged kol Yisrael be'oznehem. I'm going to give a literal translation. Call out this Torah. Read out this Torah, neged, in front of all of Israel, be'oznehem, literally into their ears. Like, blast this knowledge to them. So that's what's happening on this biblical image of the future Sukkot observance, which of course was not future for the audience that was reading this. But it proposes a Moses who can see into the future. He can see his people settled in the land. And he says, here's what you got to do, folks. Every time you come together for your biggest festival of the year, you must read this Torah. And now the verse in question, Hakhel et ha'am ha'anashim v'hanashim v'hataf v'gercha, the stranger asher bisharecha, who lives in your communities, literally within your gates, lima'an, so that yishme'u, so that they will listen, from Shema, ulema'an yilmedu, like Talmud, lamad, so that they will learn, viyaru et Adonai, and they will revere or fear Adonai your God, vishamru la'asot, there's that word again, to do or to make, so they will take heed, they will shomer, vishamru means to protect or guard, they will carefully la'asot, do et kol divrei Torah azot, all that is in this Torah. So this is a very important passage, so much so that the rabbis, when composing the liturgy for the Jewish tradition, that is to say our prayer book, insert that paragraph at the top of the Torah service. Okay, there's a long, deep rabbit hole, but that's what the disciples are telling their Rav, Rabbi Joshua, that they were learning today from the mouth of their great teacher, Rabbi Elazar. Okay, so this is the passage. Im anashim ba'im li'amod. So this is the question. And now this seems to be just what we call the stam, or just the kind of like anonymous narrative voice of the third person narrative voice of the Talmud itself. Like we don't know who's asking this question. And sometimes the Talmud just has a question about the subject that's being described. So the anonymous narrative voice of the Talmud seems to emerge to say, Im anashim ba'im li'amod, if it is men who are coming to learn, nashim ba'ot lishmoa, then women who are coming to hear, and women are coming to hear even if they weren't commanded to learn. And he's using the words in the verse, by the way. That's why looking at that verse in the sidebar is kind of helpful. You can see it says here, Hakel ta'am, assemble the people, memunun children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and learn to revere your God. So 3 verbs are actually disclosed in the passage. You're going to, well, 4, gather, then you're going to hear, and you're going to learn to revere, and then finally, a double verb construct, vishamru la'asot, in order that you will take heed or carefully do. Vishamru la'asot. Vishamru means to. Well, that was strange. Hi. I dropped out. We're all back? Yeah, we still have all 14.
It's great, as you said, we were here, we couldn't hear.
Yeah, right. So, okay, back to business. So I want to point out that the biblical verse that is being drashed, remember, this is the verse that the students tell Joshua they were learning from Rabbi Elazar in the academy. Hakel ta'am, gather the people, that's the first verb. Then, lama'an yishma'u, so that they could hear, Shema, and yilmadu, learn, and not just learn in the abstract. It's not just learning for learning's sake, but it's learning to revere Adonai, your God, and vishamru la'asot, this double verb construct of to protect and do. But I would say idiomatically, it means to pay close attention to doing et kol divrei haTorah hazot, all of the matters in the Torah. Okay, and so now the Talmud has this intriguing question that emerges from this verse. And I'm not sure who's asking this. I'm wondering, is this part of Elazar's lecture that's being recounted to Rabbi Joshua by the students who were just at the study? I don't know. Either way, the Talmud asks, if men come to learn and women who might not understand, as Steinsaltz makes clear from the gloss, come at least to hear, the women, remember, are not obliged to learn Torah. But if they are being assembled, as the verse tells us, okay, they're coming to listen. So 2 of the verbs are now accounted for. So why bring the babies? Why would you bring babies to the to this, assembly of Torah that is being described by Moses at the Sukkot festival? Well, it should just be an adults-only affair, right? We don't want little babies mucking up hearing the Torah. No, that is not what is taught. They come in order for God to give a reward to those who bring them. as it says in the Hebrew, kedei litain sachar limviehen. So they are there for the purpose of making sure that those who bring them, their family, their parents, receive a reward. Amar lahem, and presumably this is now back to Rabbi Joshua, correct. Rabbi Yehoshua said to them, Margalit tova haita biyadchem. You have this beautiful pearl in your hands. Uvi kashtem le'abdami meni, and you would dare to keep that from me? So now we get the clear sense that this is actually, they're recounting the lecture. All right, so the lecture goes like this. They were Rabbi Elazar at the head of the academy was drushing on this verse from Deuteronomy, gather the men, the women, and the little babies to hear the Torah recited aloud on Sukkot every year. All right, and the drush was, all right, the men, we know why they're there. They're there to learn Torah, just like you, the disciples in my academy. The women, why are they there? Well, even though it is not incumbent, and remember, you have to kind of accept the patriarchal norms of the society that's being illustrated for us here. Okay, accept it. You don't have to like it, just accept it. It is what it was. The women, we can come up with a very plausible answer from the text itself. If they're not there to learn, they're certainly there to listen. And women are not exempt from participation in Jewish life, even though it is not incumbent on women to become Talmud scholars, Torah scholars. Why the babies? The babies are there so that the parents can receive a reward from God for bringing them. It is really, again, this isn't the end of the passage yet, but Joshua is astonished at this, or in a great way. He says, oh my God, you had this, and he says, a margalit tova. You had a beautiful pearl. Margalit is you might even know people with that name. It's just Hebrew for pearl. You had this lovely pearl, and you didn't tell me? It's like, how could you bury the lead? You didn't start with that? All right, so Joshua was very impressed with this teaching about why the babies are there. I love the fact that he's so interested in what's happening in the study hall, too. This is a rabbi, who probably, way out of rabbinical school. But he wants to know. Okay. There's not a lot in the Hebrew, but Steinsaltz has a lot to say. Let's look at the Hebrew first. Ve'odarash. Now the students are getting excited by this conversation with their master. So the students are saying, by the way, he also drashed, meaning the lecturer, Rabbi Elazar, et Adonai he'emarta hayom. You have affirmed this day that Adonai is God. Vadonai he'emircha hayom. And that you will walk in. So he's let's look in the English, because the Hebrew here is highly elliptical, meaning it's leaving a lot out that you have to go and look up. Fortunately, Steinsaltz tells us that you can just look to Deuteronomy 26 and find it. We will do that. But reading with the gloss. Upon seeing that Rabbi Yehoshua was pleased to hear this idea, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka and Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma, the disciples, said to him, additionally, Rabbi Elazar interpreted the following verses homiletically. Here's the verse. You have affirmed this day that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his mitzvot, and his ordinances, and listen to his voice. That's just the part of the verse that they didn't take the ink to spill here, but that's the quote. And the Lord has affirmed you this day to be his treasure, as God promised you, and that you should keep all of God's mitzvot. Again, so now we're getting into another verse that was part of the lecture that morning. Here it is in its context. Deuteronomy 26, verses 17 and 18. And again, the context leading up to this is a whole series of laws about tithing. And the content seems not to be what's relevant. What's interesting is the passage at the end. There's this plea, look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people Israel and the soil you have given us, a land flowing with milk and honey as you swore to our fathers. This is part of a declaration that I think is incumbent upon the Levites to recite upon receiving their tithes. So the Levites receive their dues, their gifts from the community. Remember, the Levites do not have land. The Levites do not have an agricultural way of life. They are the priests. And so they depend on the tithes and free will dues that the people would contribute in order to subsist. And they are given an official mantra or declaration, a religious declaration that they are supposed to make upon receiving their tithes, upon accepting the tithes. They say, God, this is really all for you. Please bless the soil so that the people can grow more food so that we can all live. Okay. But here's the summation verses, the ones that are examined in today's Talmud reading. Hayom hazeh Adonai Elohecha mitzavacha la'asot chukim ha'ele. So it is this day that Adonai your God commands you, mitzavacha la'asot et hachukim ha'ele. There's that word la'asot again, to do all of the rules or to follow all of the laws, these laws rather, ve'et hamishpatim, and all of the case laws, ve'shamarta, again, shamor, and keep faithfully ve'asita otam, to do them, b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha, with all of your heart and all of your soul. So that's the first part of the commandment, and then it goes on to the verses in question. Et Adonai he'emarta, Adonai, you have affirmed this day, lihiot lecha lelohim, to be your God, v'lalechet bidrachav, and to walk in God's ways, v'lishmor chukav umitzvotav, to keep God's laws and commandments, umishpatav, and rules, case laws, v'lishmoa b'kolo, literally to listen to God's voice. Vadonai, and God in turn, it doesn't say in turn, but that's the syntax implying it. Vadonai in turn, he'emircha hayom, will declare, will affirm this day, lihiot lo la'am segula, that you shall be unto God a treasured people, ta'asher diber lach, as promised you, v'lishmor kol mitzvotav, and a people who will observe all of God's commandments. So this is a very poetic way of saying, this is the essence of the covenant, and it is bilateral. You affirm that you will be devoted to God, and God affirms through this declaration to be devoted to you as the people of God. I'll stop the sharing. I'll take Audrey's question or comment.
Essentially, I think this is the Via Hafta, isn't it? Or very similar?
It is very similar, though it is also true that the book of Deuteronomy has a unique Deuteronomic lexicon. I shouldn't say unique because there are other books of the Torah probably written at around the same time, probably written by the same author or authors that share this Deuteronomic lexicon. We refer to that section of the Hebrew Bible of the Tanakh as the Deuteronomistic history. It's a long section that goes from Deuteronomy, Joshua, Samuel, and Kings. So it's a kind of like a mega set of biblical books, all of which have similar phraseology, similar vocabulary, similar outlook, similar ideology, similar theology, and therefore have led many scholars to conclude that it's a work of one author or one school of authorship. And therefore, when you're reading Deuteronomy, I would say more so than any of the other of the 5 books of Moses, more so than certainly Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, when you read Deuteronomy, you really pick up a sense of a different writing style altogether. And that is probably because it was written entirely at a different time and milieu, and by a different author or authors. And therefore, when you encounter certain signature phrases that are found in Deuteronomy and only in Deuteronomy, you'll hear an echo of words that you already know. So, for instance, you were immediately alerted to the Shema and the Ve'ahavta when you heard, do this b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha, do this with all your heart and with all your soul. That is like chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, which is the Shema and the Ve'ahavta. But I'm not sure that they're deliberately hearkening back only to that passage. My conjecture is that Shema Ve'ahavta, this passage, and a half a dozen others in the book of Deuteronomy all use the similar language. And they're talking about one subject, which is, again, this makes sense. It's the last of the 5 books. It's right before the Israelites go into the Promised Land. They have been rehabilitated from a band of debilitated slaves into a fighting force whose mission is to conquer the Promised Land. Now one task remains, which is for Moses to tell them what it means to be a holy nation unto God. Like, yeah, we've made you into a fighting force, but who are you? What's your national identity? Okay, great. All right, so that's the verse. And the boys, they're not really boys, the men, though, who were in the academy that morning, who are now getting enthused to tell Rabbi Joshua all about what they learned in the Beit Midrash, continue. Okay, so this is now back to the narrative. Amar lahem, and again, this is the two disciples explaining to Rabbi Joshua what they learned from Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar said to them, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Amar lahem Hakadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael. So Rabbi Elazar taught that God was saying to the Israelite people, Atem asituni chativa achat ba'olam. Look at the English here, just for the translation. And again, this is the teach that the disciples received from Elazar just moments ago in the Beit Midrash that they are now recounting to Rabbi Joshua. God said to the Jewish people, you have made me a chativa achat, a single entity in the world. That is, by the way, theologically, a fascinating claim. We'll come back to it. You have made me a single entity in the world. Va'ani, and I, again, bracket, in turn, reciprocally, I, e'eseh chativa achat ba'olam. And I'm going to do the same for you, Jewish people. I will make you unique. By the way, unique, a rule around the word unique about which I am a stickler, it takes no modifier. Unique means unique. So you can't have something that is really unique or the most unique thing ever. Unique means one of a kind, therefore it cannot be modified. That's the whole point of unique. Okay, so anyway, I am a singularity, says God. Why? Not because of an intrinsic feature of God's existence, right? This is not an ontological claim about God. This is a claim that the Jewish people have actually made God into a unique entity, into something unique. And therefore, God says, I shall do the same for you. You, the Jewish people, will also be singular, unique, distinctive among all the peoples of the world. Okay? Reading on. Atem asituni, back to again, this is all the drush that they picked up that morning in the study hall. Atem asituni chativa achat ba'olam dichtiv. How do we know that you, meaning the Jewish people, have made God a single entity in the world, something unique? Dichtiv, as it is written, and here we go, Audrey, just for you. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That declaration makes God unique. Listen, O Israel, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Not that there's only one God, but that God is singular, right? God is unique. God is a single entity in the world. Or, if you really want your mind blown, you read this the way the Kabbalistic tradition reads it. Now we're jumping centuries, millennia into the future to like the medieval period. The way the Kabbalistic tradition reads this is God is the singularity that is the world. As the Hasidim would say, there is nothing that is not God. Or as my meditation teacher teaches, there is only one thing and we are all it. Which is also a Greek philosophical notion known as monism, M-O-N-I-S-M. Not monotheism, not that there's one God, but that everything that one can perceive, touch, apprehend, think about, it's all the same thing. It's all one thing. The universe is its own totality, right? So it's not that we are people and God's out there. It is we are all subsumed into this great thing called God. And by the way, you know, ask an atomic physicist and she or he might tell you the same thing. From an atomic standpoint, there really is no clear difference between where I start and where the air outside me begins, right? Or where I end and where what is outside of me begins. I'm just a like kind of a fairly recognizable electron cloud. But I'm also completely part of and dependent on my environment. Right? The way to test this hypothesis is to stop breathing for a few minutes. Don't actually try this. But if I hold my breath, if I deprive myself of the interchange of my molecules with the world around me, I cannot live. Right? So I'm not what the highly evolved cerebral cortex of my brain has fooled me into thinking I am. Right? My brain is just, well, it's not artificial intelligence, but it's an intelligence model for understanding my world, right? And my senses and my cognition have combined to create a psychological illusion that I am a self-contained entity. But I'm not. I'm all part of this thing that we call universe or God. I was hoping to have your minds blown this morning, and that can this might just do that. So what did Rabbi Elazar mean by this? Maybe he was not a Kabbalist, and it would probably be anachronistic for me to say that that's what Rabbi Elazar had in mind in this lecture. Nevertheless, it's clear that his disciples have come away from the study hall and their minds are blown, right? Now they're really opening up to Rabbi Joshua. It's like, oh, and another thing we learned today. This was an amazing day in the Beit Midrash because we learned that not only is God unique, but God as reciprocity for the Jewish people making God unique. It's not an intrinsic characteristic. It's that our declaration, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, actually affirms that God is unique in the universe. And so are we. That God's reward, as it were, for the Jewish people is to reciprocate this unique status. Okay, Judy Gross, you're on.
This is your sermon at One Mint several years ago, and I never forgot it. I have it in my file. And it's also the discussion we have with in Hinduism when we discuss the Bhagavad Gita. This is the entity that is God, and we are all one. And it's an amazing concept. And it's not an easy one, but it's a fascinating one.
Yeah, Kabbalah, by the way, is where Eastern and Western religion meet. I find that most of what you learn in Kabbalah is remarkably similar to what you might learn in the Vedas or the Bhagavad Gita, the Gitas. So, and of course, as a student of your own son-in-law, Judy, who teaches masterfully on Bhagavad Gita on Sunday mornings, and I've had the privilege of participating a handful of times, I'm struck not so much by the cultural surface differences between holy texts in the Hindu tradition and the Jewish tradition, but rather where we find common ground.
So much.
Where we land on what is ultimately true.
Because it's philosophy. It's philosophical. And if you get to that level, it's amazing. He also is teaching women who are studying Kabbalah. So it's
love that. Love that. Well, that's one reason that he and I get along. So now we have a proof text for how do we know that the Jewish people affirm God's uniqueness and therefore make it so? I think that's the other remarkable claim that these disciples are very excited about. It's like God is not anything special until or unless the Jewish people affirm God's uniqueness. It is actually the people who must affirm God. Otherwise, it really is like the tree falling in the forest, except I really do believe that a tree that falls in the forest does in fact make a sound. So the better analogy is like, what color is an apple in a dark room? And yes, it's not a golden delicious, it's a red apple, the way you thought of it. So what color is a red apple in a dark room? The answer is it's not red. Right? The color, I didn't ask what kind of pigmentation the apple has. I asked what color it is. Color is an expression of light. Without light, there is no color, right? So when I turn the lights off in this room, the colors change. Again, that is perceived, but it is also true. No, the pigments in the paint didn't change, but the actual color of the room changes, right? And if you want to render it in paint, you need a whole different palette. Okay, so an apple in a dark room is dark gray. Test it out. Turn the lights on really low and color goes away. So what they're suggesting is God is like the entity, but you need the light. And the light, interestingly enough, is the affirmation of the people. Without the affirmation, Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, God is not God, which is an astonishing theological claim, by the way. Now, what we don't have is the reciprocal proof text. I'm going to do that, and then I'll take the next question. And therefore, the reciprocity here, I will make you a single entity in the world. The proof text begins at the top of page 3b. Umi ke'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. Who is like your people Israel, one nation among the world? I wouldn't say in the land, like one nation out of the entire world, from First Chronicles. So a scriptural quote that backs up the claim. Arlene, your comment. Well, you're muted, please.
When you're in a dark room and you can no longer see the color of the apple, nothing has changed for the apple's color. It is your perception that has changed, and you're limited because of the way your rods and cones function in your biological eye.
I'm not sure that is true.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, my claim is actually the opposite, that the apple itself loses color because color must have light to function. Like color depends on light. So there's nothing wrong with my rods and cones. There's nothing wrong with my perception. My claim is that without light, the color is not there.
I don't see it that way. I'm sorry.
I know.
I see it being constant, just that your perception is impaired because of a lack of light.
That could be. I mean, the fact of the matter is some of this is true because my cat can see the apple in the room. Though my cat, interesting, even in full light, in full, you know, my cat doesn't go outside, but it's a sunny day. So if I were to turn the lights off in this room at night, my cat could see things just fine. Not great color, though. I have a wider range of color, but my cat has much better night vision. My cat can see what's happening in the dark. Like, she can find me in the dark. I just can't find me. She was under my chair for a while. Oh, she's in the bed. She's
okay.
She loves the sunlight. So I don't know if you can see her little head there. She's in the bed on the windowsill.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, though. Let's go on and see where this dialogue goes, because now there's a continuation again. And here Steinsaltz is ready to go out and say, now we're just expanding from the perspective of the unique third person narrator. But again, I think that this is it's not clear if this has to do with the dialogue between the boys, the disciples, and Joshua, because I don't think we're going to come back to Joshua for a very long time, if at all. So we've now gone down a rabbit hole, and the Talmud will be content to stay in that rabbit hole as it talks further about Rabbi Elazar's perspective on Torah. So, by the way, remember, all of this began with Rabbi Joshua saying to his disciples who came to greet him after a morning in the study hall, and said, hey, what did you learn that was new today? What was your chiddush? And they were reluctant to say, because at first they thought maybe it'll be insulting to Rabbi Joshua if we gush about this great lecture we heard. After all, we are his disciples. And Joshua was like, no, it's not study if there's no chiddush. So tell me. Okay, that's how we got here. Ve'afu patach v'darash. There's a great phrase here. He also opened up and drashed. He made meaning, right? Patach is the Hebrew verb to open, poteach. So Adonai sefatai tiftach, Adonai opened my lips, patach. So God opened, Rabbi Elazar opened up a further line of dialogue and said and explained. All right, Divrei Achamim, kadarvonot, this is interesting, kadarvonot, uchemasmerot nituim ba'alei asupot nitnu mero'e echad. All right, so this is another drash that I'm assuming was part of the same lecture, but it's not clear. The Talmud might simply be saying, oh, also, if you think Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is a wise teacher based on what you just learned, there's more from this same teacher. So the Afu Patach v'Darash, he also said, the words of the wise are as goads, and as nails well fastened are those that are composed in collections. They are given from one shepherd. Well, this is a bizarro kind of poetically expressed wisdom phrase. All right, let's go to the source. That's a good norm for us to, a good discipline for us to hold, which is that if you have a scriptural quote, don't just take it at face value. Go back and see it in its context. Maybe you'll get something more from context. So Ecclesiastes, or as it's known by its Hebrew name, Kohelet, which is the name of the wise narrative voice of the book, is a collection of proverbs deeply influenced by Greek wisdom literature, parallel in some ways to the books of Proverbs and even Psalms and even Job, in terms of having been heavily influenced by the Greeks, by Greek philosophy. We're toward the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. And so you can see toward the end, it actually just is going to record kind of like a potpourri of interesting sayings ascribed to the same narrator. Kohelet, which, by the way, Jewish tradition associates as a nickname for King Solomon. There's no historical factual basis for that conjecture, but that's the tradition. The tradition is that the book of Kohelet was composed by the wise one, who is, of course, King Solomon, only because they both have a lot of wisdom, Kohelet and King Solomon. So the traditional rabbinic interpretation is that Kohelet was written by King Solomon. Kohelet is King Solomon. All right. So Kohelet sought to discover useful sayings and recorded genuinely truthful sayings. Okay, what are they? Here's one. Divrei achamim kadarvonot uchemasmerot nituim ba'alei asupot nitnu mero'e chad. The sayings of the wise are like goads, like nails fixed in prodding sticks. They were given by one shepherd. And I'm not sure what these little superscript doodads mean. If I click them, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Great. Others are those that are composed in collections, prodding sticks. And then the second one, they were given by one shepherd, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Emendation yields, they are accounted as a sharp ox goad. So a cattle prod. So let's just take it at face value and say, all right, well, in this case, despite my plea to go back to the source and look at a scriptural verse in its context, I don't think we're going to get a whole lot, because the context is, here are a bunch of wise sayings. So the Talmud itself is going to take it as its responsibility to unpack this bizarro kind of phrase. Again, the idea is the words of the Torah are like a cattle prod given by one shepherd. All right, presumably an instrument that a person responsible for a flock uses to keep the people in line, to keep the sheep in line. All right, so like a cattle prod or an ox prod or whatever a shepherd might use. Though my understanding is that sheep tend to be much more pliable and leadable than other beasts. Okay. Why are matters of Torah compared to a goad? To tell you that just as this goad directs the cow to her furrow to bring forth sustenance for life to the world, so too the words of Torah direct those who study them from the paths of death to the paths of life. The Gemara then asks, if so, we could derive the following from the same analogy. Just as this goad is movable and not rigid, right? So it's not an iron rod that you use to poke your animal, right? A goad has some flexibility to it, right? It moves with the animal. And so the human being has to, the master, the shepherd, or the herder, has to know that there's a bit of a push and pull, right? What's my animal pulling? How am I pushing and prodding? There's some give. So too matters of Torah are movable in accordance with circumstance and not permanent. Again, okay, this might be the third time today that we're getting a statement from the Talmud that should blow your mind, because you're all devoted students of Torah. And I want you to not just read the sentence and intellectually parse its meaning. I want you to identify with the sensation of it, with what it's telling us, and then we'll talk about just that. Therefore, the verse states, nails which are permanent. So what is actually being said here? Is the premise being accepted or rejected? And as I reach the end of the passage, I think that what it's suggesting is you might think that the Torah is flexible and rigid and movable in accordance with circumstance and not permanent, but the text from here says, no, it's not just a goad which is flexible, it is also well-fastened nails. In other words, not so fast. There's a certain logic to think that, okay, there's a push and a pull. My Torah study can bend and sway, and the meaning of these words can change according to circumstances. Now, by the way, I'm very drawn to that as a Reform rabbi and as a Reform student of Torah. Like, that's exactly what I believe. I really do believe that the words are pliable and that there's a push and pull between the one who wields the study and the words on the page, right? There's a dialogue. The Gemara may be coming back to say, no, not so much. The Torah is a fixed thing. It does not change. It does not bend. It's more like a nail that holds something fast than a goad that moves an animal this way and that. And you can feel some give and pull as you're directing it. They're saying, as much as you might want to think it's that way, it's not. Final thought, it's both. Right, so what I want to suggest is perhaps, and I don't think I'm going to look a little bit further, because I looked at this passage over a week ago. Yeah, I'm not sure that these are two incompatible ideas. And again, the verse that they're playing with, this strange verse from Kohelet, analogizes the Torah in two different ways. One, it's like a goad, it's like a cattle prod. Two, it's like a nail. But those are very different tools, by the way. And again, I think that one plausible takeaway is it's actually a little bit of both. I'd like to just read a little bit further because they elaborate, the Gemara elaborates. Okay, so I'm only going to do the English here because there's a lot of like technical vocabulary. This is not like fun, oh, I recognize that Hebrew word kind of Hebrew. Okay, so the Gemara further will ask, if so, if it's more like a nail than a goad, right? That's what it's saying. If so, one can explain the verse as follows. Just as this nail is diminished in size and does not expand, as it wastes away over time. So this is interesting. I think we're talking about a wooden nail, possibly. It's hard for me to visualize a nail that wastes away over time. So I puzzled over this and didn't come away with a good answer. So too, matters of Torah are gradually diminished and do not expand. Therefore, the verse states, it is well fastened. So the nail is not something that's going to waste away. It is rather well fastened. It's secure. Just as this plant, which is a nitiyah, which is related to the word well fastened, so something that's planted, by the way, flourishes and multiplies, so too matters of Torah flourish and multiply. They're punning on all the different words in this verse from Kohelet. Those that are composed in collections, which is one of those meaning of Hebrew uncertain phrases, ba'alei asufot, literally, they're all collected up, but they are masters of collections, which makes no sense to me. Well, The interpretation in the Gemara is these refer to the Torah scholars who sit in many groups or collections and engage in Torah study. There are often debates among these groups, as some of these sages render an object or a person ritually impure, while others, meaning these and those, render it pure. Some sages prohibit an action and others permit it. Some deem something invalid and others deem it valid. So what's being described here is that we have a passage that says, look, the words of Torah are like, now we have three different metaphors. One is they're like a goad that directs the animal to the furrow which brings forth life. Two, they're like a nail, but not a nail that could wither away or rot. They're like a nail that's really well fastened and planted. Three, they're like a collection of documents. Okay, the Torah actually is a collection of documents. But they're saying what it specifically means is something that's bundled together with multiple opinions. Like they're kind of like holding up a mirror to themselves and saying, our study halls resemble this strange, hard to translate phrase in the middle of this verse from Kohelet, Ba'alei Asufot. They're like, maybe what they're saying is Torah is meant to be learned in a milieu, in a context where you have some saying yes and others saying no. This is one interpretation, this is the other interpretation. This is kosher, this is treif. And about the same thing, right? In complete holding disagreement. That's what Torah is like. So now we have three plausible metaphors for what is Torah like? Or how does Torah function in the world? Is it like a goad that changes meaning depending on the context, but that still directs us toward life, toward the furrow? Is it like a nail that is securely fastened, that never moves and that is permanent and unchanging? Or is it like an assembly of contradictory ideas all bound up together? We still have about 12 minutes of study, so I want to pause here to hear your thoughts because there's a lot going on here. And remember, all of this fits into the subject only because, oh, by the way, this is another drash from Rabbi Elazar, who really wants to get in. And remember, all of this is of a piece with the question that Rabbi Joshua asked in the beginning. Did you learn anything new? Did you have a chiddush today? Because it ain't study if you didn't have a chiddush. All right, let's take some comments and reflections. Audrey first, please.
Basically, it could be both, because if you interpret it as the core, the core teachings, the core values and instructions, and yet the idea of the flexibility or the prod enables it to be relevant from generation to generation.
Lovely. And again, that's why I deeply relate to that understanding of what Torah is and how we use it. I'm a Reform rabbi and I'm proud of it. I really think that Reform is an organized movement as of about 214 years ago. Okay. But it is an impulse within Judaism from the very first. And I think that Reform captures a certain zeitgeist that flows through Jewish civilization from the beginning to the present moment. So I'm very proud of being Reform, and therefore that informs my understanding of how Torah functions in our Jewish lives. Okay, great. Steve Kessler, please.
I think it's both, but what I mean by that, though, is that I think Torah is presented by God in the concept, first you have mitzvot, and you have commandments. And I think if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 and on, God instructs Moses to tell the Israelites, it comes down very simple, you to choose life or death, or good or evil. And therefore, the fixed part of this is you're commanded to have faith and awe of God and try to build and create sustainable, loving, and just communities. And within that commandment, you then can pursue your learning and create wisdom. But you must be committed to the faith as presented by God.
Beautiful way of harmonizing the kind of internal dissonance in these different interpretations of the metaphor. What is Torah like, right? It is both fixed and flexible. but you have to accept certain baseline. You have to be in the covenant if you want to get to the next level of relationship, which enables your flexibility in how it is interpreted. Lovely, Steve. Michelle.
I just want to say that this whole discussion is so Jewish.
Indeed. Yes, thank you. That's why I picked this passage today. Russell? Oh, maybe you're muted. I didn't mean to dismiss your hand. You're still
I'm
muted.
sorry.
Yep. There.
I love that you related this to the Reform movement, because one thing that this makes clear is that the Torah is metaphor. It is not to be read literally. It is always to be new. It is always to be personal. And I think each of us, can ask oneself, what did you learn today? But it certainly is, this passage, I think, is the enemy of literalism.
Beautiful. Great. Okay, that leads me to what I consider to be the coda for today's study. So the next paragraph, we're just going straight in sequence. I've just scrolled a little bit farther on the screen. Shema Yomar Adam. Now, lest a person say, in response to everything that just came before, okay, so how can I even study Torah then? You've just given me all of these interpretations. You've just told me that, well, Torah study is like a collection of rabbis sitting together, disagreeing with one another. And a person who does not come to the religious enterprise or to the enterprise of study, hoping much less expecting much less hoping to receive a whole muddle of different opinions, might be intimidated, might be turned off. So if a person says, how am I even supposed to study this thing, as Steinsaltz glosses, when it contains so many different opinions? Talmud Lomar, the end of the verse from Kohelet is relevant. Kulam nitnu meroeh echad, but it was all given by one shepherd. So this is now back to the great mythos, right? The master story is that, yes, it contains multitudes, but it was still the unified statement of one shepherd. And in this case, they say Moses, though I think that Moses is also an avatar for the real shepherd, who is God. El echad nitanan, one God gave them, meaning the laws. Parnas echad amaran, one provider uttered all of them. Mipi adon kol hamasim baruch hu, from the mouth of one God. So, it was one shepherd, meaning Moses, one declaration, one God. And God contains multitudes, right? And this actually is, it may be Rabbi Elazar is theologically consistent, because remember, it's Elazar who says God is a singularity, or God is the single thing. There is only one thing and we are all it. Or there is only one thing and it is all God, which is the same statement, by the way. Means the same thing. But contains multitudes. Within the unity, there is incredible multiplicity and divergence, right? All right. What's the proof text? Diktiv, Vaidaber Elohim et kol hadivarim ha'eleh. And God spoke all these words, which is the preamble to the 10 Commandments. But it's being read over broadly. It's not just saying when God spoke all these words, it refers to the next chapter or the next set of verses, the 10 Commandments which follow. No. God spoke all the words. Every word that could ever be uttered about Torah was part of the divine utterance at Sinai. Right? That's what's being said here. And then just coda to the coda. So what's the takeaway for the disciples now? And again, we've really zoomed out the lens from this interesting little ma'aseh. Remember, it started with a ma'aseh. Here's an anecdote about something that happened on the way back from the study hall to two rabbis meeting their master teacher, Rabbi Yehoshua. And then they report what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught them in the Beit Midrash. Like, that's how this started. But now we're at a whole zoomed out perspective where the Talmud is talking directly to you, student of Torah. Westchester Reformed Temple and Friends, my mavens. Thursday, June 20th, 2024. You're the audience now. Afata, so you to ase oznecha Ke'afar keset. Make your ears like a funnel and acquire for yourself an understanding heart. To hear both the statements of those who render objects ritually impure and the statements of those who render them pure, the statements of those who prohibit actions and the statements of those who permit them, the statements of those who deem items invalid and the statements of those who deem them valid. When Rabbi Yehoshua heard these, now we're finally back to the anecdote. When Rabbi, which will rarely for the Talmud, but we are going to get a little bit of a bow to tie this all up. When Rabbi Yehoshua heard these interpretations, he said to them in these words, said to his disciples, no generation is orphaned, that is, without a leader, so long as Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah dwells among it. In other words, the Jewish people are in very good hands. So again, I want you to hear the verse here. It says, make your ears like a funnel, ukenei lecha lev mevin lishmoa, and a heart, but the heart is also the seat of the intellect in traditional Jewish literature. So the heart, it's more like the heart mind. They're certainly not talking about the organ that pumps blood. They're talking about the seat of both intellect and emotion. Your psyche might be a better way of translating the word lev. Make your psyche big enough to understand, well enough to hear conflicting opinions, divergent opinions, which is a very hard thing to do. Most people want one truth. And Judaism, at least the Judaism that is being taught by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who has earned the praise of the great Rabbi Joshua, Judaism says, no, you don't get one truth. You must have an enlarged capacity to hear contradiction. You must embrace it with your whole heart. And so long as that is the Torah being taught, Rabbi Joshua says the Jewish people are not orphaned, which is an incredible, like I'm getting a little bit verklempt because this is an incredibly poignant statement for a community that has been uprooted from its land, its seat of power, its sovereignty, and its temple, right? This is saying, so long as we have a Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in our midst, we have, we are not orphans. It is a gorgeous ending to this passage. And again, specifically, what's the big chiddush here? The biggest chiddush of many chiddushim, of many new understandings that are brought forth in this fairly compact passage of Talmud, Chagigah 3b and 3a and 3b, is make yourself a heart, an ear like a funnel, which a funnel, by the way, isn't the same thing as a tunnel. Like it has to filter some. A funnel does filter, but take in as much, including contradictory stuff, as you can. That's what it means to be a true student of Torah. So that's the end of my lecture. We have about 2 minutes for thoughts or comments, but I feel so grateful to have people whose ears are indeed like funnels and whose hearts are very big, because you wouldn't have stuck around for this much Talmud study with me and with each other if you didn't already have a desire to enlarge your heart and your seat of intellect to contain divergent opinions. Judy Gross. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Okay, to me, this also is so essential. And what's, as Michelle said, it is so Jewish. This can be interpreted from any form of Judaism, from the Hasidim to the conservative, to us, to the Reform, any interpretation, because it's interpretation. But there's that one central Torah that we all gather around and feel it's in our hearts. And the other thing I just want to say is, as far as teaching and getting anything out of any class, I always say, if there's a great teacher, take the class. It doesn't matter what that person is teaching. Take it, and you are the one.
Well,
you are a teacher. Whatever you're teaching, I'll take it.
Well, thank you. I have had an Elazar ben Azariah in my life many, many times, and I completely agree. Take whatever a great teacher teaches. I mean, the old adage about reading the phone book, I would stop short of actually hearing a professor read the phone book. But I've had so many incredible teachers, and I have come away, and I remember like what it was like to take a class with a great professor. You really do get a chiddush every time. You should get a chiddush every time. You should get something that you had never thought of before. Otherwise, it ain't study. And this idea that, you know, contradictory truth is Torah. Thank God the Talmud says this. Like, thank God our tradition says this. I've bookmarked this passage for one of about 25 different ideas I have for high holiday sermons, which is where my development stage is right now, which is where it should be. I believe that the art of high holiday sermon writing is mostly about taking a block of marble and chipping away and chipping away and chipping away, because any rabbi can say a lot of things, but you only have a few things to say on the high holidays, and you don't have a long time to say it. And this year especially, it's going to be very hard. But I was up late last night just because an idea came to me about, I like using you as my, you know this, right? You're my guinea pigs for road testing ideas for high holiday sermons. So I had this idea about one of the unfortunate features that I think has been reinforced in our echo chamber, social media infected information landscape is that we tend to map onto our understanding of the world the mental maps that we have already built out of our own experiences of the world. So, in other words, Jamal Bowman, just as an example. Oh, and by the way, do go vote. You can do that between now and next Tuesday, which is election day in the New York State primary. This is a consequential election. They all are consequential, so please vote. But Jamal Bowman, and he's told me this. I'm not saying this to denigrate. I'm saying it because he's reported it to my face, and he'll say it publicly. His mental map of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was formed as a young man, as an adolescent in the Bronx, seeing friends and being himself beaten up by white cops. And that's the mental map he puts onto Israel-Palestine. Now, my critique is that that's not Israel-Palestine. That's Jamal Bowman's mental map. By the way, because I'm an equal opportunity offender, I have come to believe that way too many Jewish people in both Israel, but especially here in the States, in diaspora, have a mental map of the Holocaust. And that's the one that we're putting onto Israel-Palestine. And by the way, it's not that it's irrelevant entirely, but it's really the wrong mental map. And so I believe that the highest pursuit is truth. And so, but when I hear like this wonderful passage from Chagigah inviting us, pleading with us to make your heart big enough to accept contradictory truths, I hear a very important riposte to anyone who believes that their truth is singular. Their truth is the only one that describes reality. When in fact, no, there is an existential reality to what's happening between Israel and Gaza, and between Israel and the Palestinians, between Israel and its neighbors. But we can't narrate it. At least we can't capture more than a tiny fraction of what it really means with our mental map alone. You probably need about 50 mental maps to map onto the situation, even to get a glimmer of what's really going on. And even that won't suffice. You need to be there. Like you need to, and the reality of a Palestinian mother in Gaza is vastly different from an Israeli mother whose child is fighting in Gaza. And they're both true in terms of what they believe and understand about this conflict. Okay, I'm testing ideas on you. More to come. We have one more bonus session before I take a little hiatus for the summer, and then we'll be back in Elul. Do tune in on Friday, I think in person if you can make it, or online. Danny Rader is going to be an incredible rabbi. The fact that she hasn't had one day of rabbinical school and she's going to give a Devar Torah, I promise you're going to have a Rabbi Elazar moment. You're going to say, oh, that's a chiddush. I had not thought of that before. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. See you very soon. Bye-bye.